Uh, okay, we had a session last week and we've had some questions that have come up. I'd like to welcome all you that have joined us already. I think there are 10 people already. And the first thing that we are going to talk about is an answer to a question concerning hands-free equalization, BTV. It comes from a French word, béance tubulaire volontaire, which means a voluntary opening of the eustachian tubes. In other words, it is not dependent, as a frenzel is, on using the back of your tongue as a piston to push up your soft palate and force air into the middle ear. It is simply allowing the air between the mouth and the middle ear to equalize naturally by opening the eustachian tubes. Now, a few words about this before we begin. First of all, we're not all built equal. That's the bad news. Some of us have eustachian tubes that you could probably drive a Ford truck through. Other people have narrow eustachian tubes. This is complicated by the length of the eustachian tube, and some people also, a shorter eustachian tube is better. Some people even have a kind of a loop in their eustachian tube, and that's the hardest thing of all to deal with. Just recently I came across somebody who had a sort of mobile eustachian tube. The doctor described it as a loop that moved around. It's possible that they had a rattlesnake in their ear, but I'm not quite sure of that one. So I won't get into that one in depth. So, in other words, what I'm trying to tell you is to let you down slowly, that hands-free equalization, BTV, is not accessible to everybody. I would say that there are people who might have some physiological difficulties and can equalize perfectly well with a frenzel, but will not be able to equalize with BTV. The other thing is, the other factor that we have to put into the picture is something else. Not everybody can immediately locate the muscles that have to be operated that actually open the eustachian tube. One side of the eustachian tube is against the bone, and the other side of the eustachian tube is a muscle that, when it contracts, pulls the eustachian tube away from the bone and thus opens the eustachian tube. Now, this we do automatically. Every time we swallow, we are opening our eustachian tubes. So the question is, the other thing here, what kind of eustachian tube have you got? Apart from swallowing, which is not, of course, hands-free equalization, we have to try and find out what the other challenges involved here are. That's from me completely. The point being here that in order to open the eustachian tube, as I said, let me go back, recap, because we had a small technical fault there that threw me way off track. In order to locate those muscles, that's kind of an art. And experience has pointed out that there's a very funny division of people here, those who can and those who can't. In 2008, I was sitting with Martin and a group of his students, and we were carrying on a conversation with them. This is after a competition, and one of them asked particularly about who could and who couldn't equalize their ears using BTV. And believe it or not, both of us answered the question in exactly the same words simultaneously. And what we said was, anybody who can wiggle their ears, yeah, can learn to do BTV. Now, the particular part of the ear that we're talking about, I hope you'll be able to see this, is right here. And I don't know if you'll be able to see my ear move, whether I'm still in the picture or not in the picture.
You are.
And I'm equalizing at the moment. I don't know whether the picture is good enough to be able to detect that. However, if you look at yourself in the mirror and you look at that part of the ear, if you see it moving when you're trying to equalize, or if you try to waggle your ears and see it moving, then you have a very, very, very good chance of learning to do BTV. Now, if you can't, I won't say that it's impossible, but the odds are a little bit against you here. Now, one of the main tricks about this thing is, particularly for the people who can waggle their ears, is to go on doing it until something happens in the ear. If you go on concentrating on it enough and actually visualizing what has to happen, that the eustachian tube has to open, eventually it's going to happen. Now, there are a few other tricks that we've got up our sleeve that can help us a lot to realize this. The first part of the movement of the BTV is actually exactly like the beginning of a yawn. And if you can, by attempting to yawn voluntarily, you can begin to locate those muscles. Another way of doing it is by using a combination of sound and muscle movement. Now, what we do here is something else. Better to do it perhaps with a nose clip. You can do it with your fingers if you want to. Put the nose clip on, and you equalize, and you make a sort of deep humming noise immediately after you've equalized. And you should get a big vibration in the head. Now, if you can reach that point of getting that, you've equalized. You can play with the jaw a bit. Now, here's the ticket. What you've done, in effect, is that you've equalized, and during the time of equalization, of course, the eustachian tube opens, but with the humming, you've kept it open. Now, the next thing to do is to do it with the hands, where I equalize, carry on the humming, but take my hand away and see whether I still get that big type of vibration in the head. If you don't know whether you're succeeding in this or not, I can tell you that the moment you do succeed, you will know. If you're hearing the sound like it's coming from outside your head, then you haven't succeeded. But if you have succeeded, it sounds as if there's a big humming, and it sounds as if it's coming from inside your head. So off we go again. What we're going to do this time is we're going to equalize, take the hand away, but carry on humming. And if there's been no change in the vibrations and no change in the tone, we have succeeded in keeping the eustachian tube open. And it works. It's a very small step from there, just practice, to being able to open the eustachian tubes yourself. Now, doing it in the water is a bit of a different challenge. The first thing is that the first equalization, of course, has to be on the surface just before you go down, immediately before you go down. The next equalization has to be when no more than half your body is underwater. Thereafter, you can equalize the moment you find pressure building. Now, if you try to equalize too often, you'll drive yourself crazy, because your ears don't need to equalize every 20 centimeters or every 50 centimeters. Yeah? Allow a good 2 meters and then try again. You'll feel the pressure building, and then you'll feel the pressure go away. It may not make exactly the same sound as your frenzel does. However, if you find that you can carry on and that there's no increase in the pressure, you have succeeded. Go on to the next one. Wait another 2 meters or so. Try again. You should feel the pressure building and building and building and getting stronger. And there's a moment where it feels ripe. It feels like an apple ready to drop from the tree. And boom, you equalize at that point. Now, the great advantage of no hands equalization is, first of all, it's instantaneous. If we're wearing a mask, which I know a lot of you are not in competition, but if you're wearing a mask, bringing your hand to your nose to equalize is actually a slow process. Between the time the mind has registered, now is the time to re-equalize, and the time that it's taken you to actually perform the maneuver, a second or so has passed. And that second or so means that you've gone down another meter or two, and you've passed the ideal point of equalization. Remember, when you go down in the water, water comes into the middle ear, pushes it in towards the middle ear, goes into the outer ear, pushes the eardrum in towards the middle ear. You force air up your Eustachian tubes, and the eardrum returns to its normal shape. Now, water comes into the outer ear, pushes the eardrum. If we equalize too late, it doesn't go back all the way. And each time after that, the water is going to win until very quickly we reach a point where we can't equalize. So timing in this is essential and acute. And the great advantage of hands-free equalization is that there is absolutely no space between now I have to equalize and the fact that you're actually succeeding in doing it. Very important point. From an energy point of view, it's by far the most efficient. A couple of specialists in this have taken it to more than 100 meters. William Trubridge for one, and of course Martin Stepanek, who's taken it a great deal deeper than that. Martin was still, don't forget, wearing a mask at 122 meters, and he still wasn't using his hands. Now, one of the things about breathwalk is this, that if you can do it, and you find that it gives out at a certain depth, let's take, for example, 30 meters, gives out, can't do it anymore. Reason is that the muscle isn't strong enough. So you have to do some exercise. And the exercise for that is practicing the equalization, no hands equalization, breathwalk equalization, about 300 times a day. And keep that up for a month, and I can assure you, you will have strengthened the muscles involved, and you'll be able to do it a lot deeper once you've mastered the technique. Now, another tip and another shortcut for any of you who have access to scuba. It is much easier to do it and to learn it, to teach yourself on scuba. Let me backtrack a bit. The main thing is, first of all, understanding what has to happen. The next thing, which is very, very, very important, is visualizing that it's happening. And the third part of the equation is believing that it will happen. Now, putting all three of those together, persisting with it, if it's important enough to you, there's a very good chance you'll get there. Try the test. For those who can waggle their ears, they certainly will be able to learn it without too much fuss. Those who can't waggle their ears, it's going to be a harder passage and may even be impossible. For the people who can't waggle their ears but are still desperately committed to doing it, I advise you to go and see an ear, nose and throat specialist and try and get some sort of an idea from him. He may send you for ultrasound or some other type of imaging, and he may then, after that, should be able to give you an opinion of what the condition of your eustachian tubes are. Now, there's a final factor involved in all this. A week ago, I discussed frenzel, and we talked about the first steps in learning the frenzel are learning to get the tongue movement right in the mouth. So we would put on our nose clip, we would stand in front of a mirror, and what we'd do is we'd shine a light into the mouth. I'm going to lift the nose clip a bit so we can see what I'm doing here. Obviously I wouldn't go underwater in that way, but I think I can equalize like that. I open my mouth wide. Keeping the mouth wide open, I equalize and watch what's happening to the back of my tongue. Now, I hope you could see that. Of course, picture quality here is a bit problematical. You should see the front of the tongue relaxed, usually quite close to the bottom teeth, the front of the bottom teeth there, but relaxed. Bottom of the front of the tongue is not that active. The point is that the back of the tongue is lifting and pushing on the soft palate. And that's what's pushing the air up into your eustachian tubes. We talked about that. A person goes into the sea, can do that absolutely correctly, has no movement with his diaphragm, and still in a head down position, can't manage it. The first thing that you have to ask the person, if you're a trainer or an instructor, is your diet. An awful lot of people have an allergy to either milk or wheat. In our normal lives, this doesn't present any problem whatsoever. However, to a person trying to overcome equalization problems, it can be the deciding factor. I was trainer of a young lady in Mexico who was an excellent swimmer, and I trained her first in the pool to make sure that she could move correctly underwater, not just on the surface. She was a competition swimmer, and a very competent one. And she managed to do very, very quickly 105 meters, dynamic, no fins. Now here's the ticket. What happened with her was that we took her into the sea and she became a tea bag. Up and down, up and down, up and down to 5 meters. Couldn't pass it. Talked about her diet with her, and she was drinking an awful lot of milk. We took the milk out of the diet, and lo and behold, she could do 25 meters or 23 meters on her first dive. I've repeated this story again because, again, to reinforce the idea, if all is not working and you feel it should be working, it's quite possible that that's the problem. So try removing the milk products and see if this helps. That's all the help that I can give you on the BTV. It is one of the hardest things to learn. It is certainly the hardest thing to teach, because usually you can see what a student is doing wrong. In this you can't. It's something that he has to learn. He has to become his own instructor. So that's about all the help I can give you with that. It is very efficient. It works wonderfully well when it works. And if you find it's working part of the time, but not all the time, probably it's a question of the timing of your equalization, or alternatively, you've got an allergy problem. Okay. Now I just want to check for a second whether we've got questions coming up. By the way, when we ask for questions, we're merely asking you for what you'd like to hear an opinion about. So if, I'm going to take a minute's break now, and if any of you have something that is a subject that you'd particularly like talked about, freediving subject, please just post it now. Anything going on?
No.
Okay, well, if anything comes up, I'll address it when it does. But I will go on to our second subject, which has got to do with winter training. We're now in the winter period. And freediving right at the moment in an awful lot of countries of Europe is not a terribly attractive proposition, except for the absolute fanatics. Except if we have a nice heated pool that we can go to. However, if we really want to do our best in the summer, then we have to prepare our bodies and our psychology and everything else for those challenges. Now, the first thing that we want to do when we construct a training plan is look at the various factors that we need for a dive. Now, one of the factors that's common to nearly all types of diving, except static, which is a category by itself, is style, how we move through the water. Let me talk about this for a fraction of a second. This is a very, very important thing. Swimmers have an axiom that says something like a 10% improvement in style is a 10% improvement in results. Not 100% the same thing for freedivers, because of course in depth we have other factors like equalization, acclimatization or adaptation to pressure, etc., etc., etc. But by and large, it's still a very, very important factor for us, learning how to move through this exceptionally dense medium. It has several elements involved here, one of which is hydrodynamicism, and the other is actual correctness of movement. Correctness of movement gives us our power of propulsion through the water. Hydrodynamicism means cutting down drag. And this is probably more important even than the amount of propulsive force that we exert. We can see that if we push our hand through the water like that, it requires a tremendous amount of force, and still we'll not get to anything like the degree of efficiency if we pushed our hand through the water like this, which requires much less force and is far more efficient. Now, okay, what's in between here? Little tilts, small degrees of angle make an awful amount of difference. When we're going down, again, we have factors of creating or not creating drag, and that means great body alignment, perfect body alignment, yeah, and that the movement creates the minimum amount of drag and the minimum amount of turbulence as we're going down. So there's an awful lot of exercises that we can be doing in the winter, drills to reduce drag, increase the efficiency of our stroke, be it with bifins, monofin, or without fins altogether. And any time that we invest in this will pay us back hugely. So that's the first thing. The next thing is this, that let's look at the downside of the thing, that if we don't deal with this and we go straight into doing tables for improving our lactic tolerance or improving CO2 resistance, etc., etc., what's going to happen is that if we're making poor movements or bad movements, incorrect movements, every time we're going to be reinforcing them. So if we haven't corrected them and we're doing other exercises, we're actually moving ourselves further and further away from our objective. So please don't underestimate how important these things are. Okay, so drills are critically important. There are drills for the monofin, there are drills for bifin, for improving bifin, and there are drills also, of course, for improving your breaststroke. There are even drills which are far, far simpler for improving free immersion. Those drills for free immersion are basically done dry. But nevertheless, you are training body memory. One of the drills for free immersion, Genius worked it out. He was actually working on one of the rigs in the North Sea. He liked to train for free immersion. And what he did was he rigged out a pulley on the floor, a pulley on the ceiling, and a continuous line going round. And so he was reaching close to the face, reaching up as high as he could, lifting his arm even further, and pulling down close to the face, keeping the elbow in line, in slipstreaming into the body. And then working out the optimum place for the hands to change, lift, and pull. Change, lift, and pull. And this became a pulling drill. You have to think that you're teaching a small child to do this. So it's wonderful having a mirror to do it, because you can spot immediately if you are making any faults. Very often we get a little bit sloppy here or there if we're not getting any sort of biofeedback. In the pool, if you've got a friend with a GoPro, or if you've got a friend that can video you with any other camera, this is an invaluable asset because you can get feedback afterwards. You can sit there with your trainer or with your instructor or with videos of one of the champions of swimming or freediving, and compare what's happening with you and what should be happening. So, okay, that's enough said about style and hydrodynamicism. What about the next things? Well, of course, one of the things is breathhold. Now, there's an awful lot of controversy about this one. I am not going to address necessarily here somebody who is training for a static competition. That's a whole different ballgame, and static is a very, very specific thing in itself. An awful lot of static. Static is probably one of the disciplines that is most diet dependent. Static needs a very specific type of training that is completely different from any of the other depths or dynamic disciplines. Static, when used as an element to increase our overall breathhold potential, is again a different story entirely, and that I am going to talk about. So there's two types, basically, of breathhold, what I call stress breathhold, which a good example of it might be dynamic in one of its many forms, either dynamic with a bifin, dynamic with a monofin, or dynamic no fins. Now we have dry exercises, which are a very, very good substitute for this. One of the advantages of a dry exercise is we can do it nearly anywhere, we can do it nearly at any time, we don't have to pay a hugely expensive pool membership, and if we haven't got a partner, we can still do it. Or if your partner's let you down this week, he's gone and done something completely idiotic like get himself flu. You can still do dynamic training, and very efficient dynamic training that will move you forward. One of the main types of dynamic training is, of course, the breathwalk. We use the breathwalk. I'm going to talk now about the breathwalk before we go on to anything else. It's a superb, if I had to choose one way of preparing, of upping my breathhold for any of the depth disciplines or any of the pool dynamic disciplines, and I hadn't got access to water, this would be it 100 times over. Now what we do is this: we analyze a deep dive. That's the first thing we begin with. By analyzing a dive, you say to the person that you're going to train, look, John, you want to do this season, let's say 80 meters. I tell you what, just to make the figures very, very simple, let's say you want to do 100 meters. I know this is unlikely, but it just does help my mathematics, and the principle is the same regardless of the depth. So first of all, let's analyze that dive. The person at the beginning of the dive, when he leaves the surface, is pumping down to, let's say, somewhere between 30 and 35 meters, where he will hopefully go into the glide. Now the glide can be at first an intermittent glide. That means, say, he's doing an occasional movement and a long period of glide that actually goes on lengthening before he goes into the full glide, which he might do at 50 meters. But let's consider that, let's say there's some people who are lucky enough at 30 meters, if they were neutrally buoyant, let's say at 15, to be able to go into the glide at 30 meters. Just to make the numbers here easy and accessible to people who are wearing shoes. By that means you don't have to take off your shoes and count on your toes. Now here's the ticket. The first part of the dive, you're going down and you're working very hard to the point of neutral buoyancy, or comparatively hard. Then you're still working energetically from the point of view of neutral buoyancy until about 30 meters. Well, actually to a point where if you stop movement, you're not decelerating. We call this the point of non-deceleration. Let's say that that point, for the sake of argument, is at 30 meters. So let's say that from the surface, on the descent, let's divide it into two here. We have effort going down to 30 meters. And let's say that we're managing to do that at a meter a second. Then, still keeping the same velocity, we are sinking without effort, rather like a static, for 70 meters until we get to our target at 100. Now, coming back from 100, we are working all the way up to within 10 meters of the surface, where hopefully we can stop all movement and float up to the surface. So let's look at this in terms of time. If, on the descent, I have 30 meters of effort, 30 seconds of effort, and 70 seconds, that's a meter and 10 seconds, of static. On the ascent, I have another 10 seconds of static, the 10 seconds from 10 meters to the surface. So altogether, for this dive, I need a static element of a minute 20 and 90 seconds on the ascent and 30 seconds on the descent of effort. So if I sit down and I do this, to prepare myself for this dive, I say to myself, if I can sit here, ventilate, hold my breath for a minute 20, get up and then walk for 2 minutes, I am prepared for that dive, for 100 meters. The effort is really about the same. Very, very strong parallels here. So I have a very, very useful tool here, and it doesn't matter whether it's 100, I just adjust the figures if we can understand the pattern here of what we're attempting to do. So let's take that. At first, when I'm first learning the breathhold thing, I may have analyzed my dive. Let's say that more modestly I'm doing 50 meters, but I'm still going into the glide at 30. So I'm going to have 30 seconds of effort, 20 seconds of static, and on the way up, I'm going to have also another 10 seconds of static. So altogether I'm going to have 30 of static. On the way down, I'm going to have 30 of effort, and on the way up I'm going to have 40 of effort. So that's 70, that's a minute 10. So if I can hold my breath for half a minute static and then do a minute 10 walk, I'm ready for 50 meters. So we can understand how to build the exercise. I will do 4 repetitions of this exercise, and it doesn't matter how long between the repetitions. I'm not talking about taking half an hour between them, but it's not an interval exercise. You can wait till you feel recovered. Now, one of the great advantages is that if I do this with a heart monitor, I'm going to discover certain patterns. When I am breathing, my heartbeat could be anything, maybe even up in the range of what the sea mammals have before they go down. Sea mammals have a heartbeat of about 88 beats a minute. I mean, not saying necessarily you're going to be that high, but it's actually not too important what your heartbeat is at the end of the ventilation. But during the time of the static, particularly if it's a minute 20 or a minute and a half, anywhere a minute, somewhere around there, of static, what should happen is that your heartbeat should drop considerably. Now, depending on how well trained you are, that's how much the heartbeat will drop. And it's actually very dependent on how quickly your breathhold reflex kicks in. More about that in a second. Here's the funny one. Holding your breath statically, and while still holding your breath, you get up and walk. Now, the heartbeat at the end of the walk should have dropped furthest. It should be even lower than it was at the end of the static. Then, when you can't hold your breath anymore, you stop and you make a mark on the ground. But you stand there, you watch your heart monitor go up, you remember how high it went up. Could go up to 90 if you're a beginner, it could go up to 115 or 120 if you're really pushing it. So that last heartbeat will in fact tell you how hard you've been pushing it. If you write down all this stuff, it gives you the most tremendous amount of information about yourself. It gives you a very good indication of whether you have a breathhold reflex, how hard you're pushing, when the breathhold reflex kicks in. Now, typically what's very funny, when you hold your breath, whether statically or in the walk, the first thing that happens is what's called tachycardia. The heartbeat goes up. Then the next thing is that it starts to go down. Now, that could be an equilateral triangle. If you were talking about a period of time, like a minute, that the tachycardia phase would be 30 seconds and the bradycardia phase would be 30 seconds. So you pretty much end up where you were. If the tachycardia phase is short and the bradycardia phase is much longer, your heartbeat's going to drop. If the reverse is true and the tachycardia phase is long and the bradycardia phase is short within a minute, that means that your heartbeat requires more time to go down. That's probably an indication that you actually need more, warm-up. These are all indications of what's happening inside you. You'll also notice if you're walking and you're looking at your heartbeat at the same time while you're holding your breath, that actually the heartbeat doesn't really drop except right at the end. The last 5% of the walk is when the heartbeat is going to really go down. That's when the heart gets the message, hey, there's an emergency here. I'm going to have to slow down the heart to preserve oxygen. Now, with more and more practice, that's going to happen earlier and earlier. So this is an incredibly valuable exercise, and you can learn an awful lot about yourself from the exercise, as well as the fact that it will increase your potential hugely and give you a very good idea as to whether you're ready for that dive. We do this in all for all the people who are training with us, and also for, of course, in our courses. If you have any specific questions about that, I invite you to look at them next week. Now, I rely on you to feed me, so I don't repeat myself for people. I rely on you to feed me questions that you'd like talked about. There are other elements, of course, of winter training, which are very, very important. One of them is the question of flexibility. Flexibility is very important in the fact that it allows us much greater fluidity and ease of movement through water. More than that, flexibility is critical for good equalization at depth. Now, an awful lot has been talked about what kind of flexibility we need for that. And there's been an awful lot of misunderstanding and even dangerous advice given to people. Recently there was a discussion on the deeper blue where somebody raised the topic of first packing and then stretching. By that I mean stretching on a packed lung. This is a practice that is very dangerous. Any form of overpacking dry, you can do yourself a huge amount of damage. There have been instances of pneumothorax, a burst lung. There have been instances of air embolism. Basically what's happening is that the alveoli are expanding and expanding and expanding until virtually they become nets that small bubbles can pass through into the bloodstream. And that can leave you either paralyzed or could even cause death. Overpacking is seriously dangerous. If you pack to capacity dry, you're really playing with fire. Now, here's the ticket. Pack, if you must pack, pack moderately. Do not stretch on a packed lung. This is a disastrous recipe and can lead to a great deal of trouble. Also, another thing, why is it necessary? It's the other kind of flexibility that we need most. We need to be able to raise the diaphragm to its highest point. In other words, the flexibility between the intercostals here and raising the diaphragm. In other words, reducing our residual capacity. And that's the one that will allow us to, number one, adapt far better to pressure at depth. Adaptation to pressure is something that is vastly ignored by people. An awful lot of people who think that they can get away with, if they've done, I don't know, 200 meters dynamic in a swimming pool, they want to go to a competition and think that they can declare a huge number in depth and with very few practice dives. Sorry guys, that doesn't work. Never has, never will. And you're really flirting with a very serious injury or death if you play that game. It takes the body time to react, to adapt to pressure. The French have the saying, l'apnée s'entraîne l'apnée. The best training for freediving is freediving. This is an axiom and it's 100% true. We also well know all the story about depth pressure points. A person goes down the line, yeah, and he stops at, I don't know, 65 meters exactly. Hasn't got a watch on, no marks on the line. How does his body know, yeah, to stop exactly within 20 centimeters every time at 65 meters? It's simply, to a certain extent, the limit of his flexibility today. I can be squeezed only so much, and then, yeah, the body starts pushing back. The moment the body starts pushing back, hey guys, no more equalization. Where are the sensors for this? In between your intercostals. So here again, general flexibility of the intercostal cage is critical. One of the best tools that we have for getting that is this. Very small ball. I think it's a 10-inch ball. You can buy them from a lot of places. I believe you can buy, if you look up bender balls on the internet, you can buy them there. Most shops, physio shops, have these balls. And what you do is you lie on your back on the floor. And halfway between, if I was going to put a spike through the base of my sternum here, at the base of my sternum I've got something called the zypoid process, a little flexible tip. If I push the spike through there going right the way through my back, yeah, halfway between there and the big protruding vertebrae at the base of the neck here, halfway between the two is where I place the ball on the back. Now, you lie on that ball, bending your head back, trying to get your head as close to the floor as possible and as close to the ball as possible, and keeping your butt firmly on the floor. Lie in a cruciform position for 15 breaths. Then bring your hands to a classic monofin position for another 15 breaths. This is one of the best exercises that you can do for opening the thoracic cage. And it's quite an easy one, quite a comfortable one. It's a lot of fun. You lie on your yoga mat, you're lying on your ball, and you're not having to exert yourself very much. There are all kinds of yoga asanas. Eventually I'm going to put them up on my website at www.freedivers.net. At the moment I've got something called the Tibetan 5, which are more generally useful, but not specifically back bends. For those people who know something about yoga, the positions that you really are important to you are, of course, cobra, udayana. The locust is very important, or what is called by some people chakrasana, the wheel. Other people, it has another name called urdhva same position but different name. And of course the camel, which is kneeling and reaching back and touching your heels, grasping your heels, all working on different parts of the back. You only need about 5 or 6 postures, and you need to work them regularly on a daily basis if you can. Now, apart from that, a very, very good exercise for the thoracic cage is, of course, the yogic exercise of udayana bandha. You can see my ex-wife and partner Maria Teresa doing it on YouTube. If you dial in Maria Teresa Solomons and you dial in udayana, you're going to find it.
I'll post the link.
And we're sending out the link now. You can view this video. She is confusingly also mixing it with nauli. Nauli is when you're actually rotating the abdominal ridge. That one is not necessary for free diving. Lifting the diaphragm certainly is. You want the maximum degree of flexibility in your diaphragm. Now, here's another thing. I'm going to disappoint you over this one. Years ago, we tried out a machine called the Power Lung, which, with its advertising, advertises huge successes at increasing your vital capacity and everything else. We found that, or the expander lung, there are many, many different versions of the things. We found that actually it had, with some real science behind it, some real control groups and everything else, we found in a decent period of trying it out that actually did exactly the reverse. Without any mentioning any specific make here, those machines on the whole tend to strengthen the diaphragm. What happens when you strengthen a muscle? You contract it. And actually the movement of the diaphragm became less. So you were not actually doing anything for yourself with those at all. I don't necessarily think that they're a great idea. Your daily routine of udayana, because it has to be a daily routine of that. I'm talking about short little things. Your stretching and your udayana is certainly part of it. Don't overdo it. It's done on totally empty lungs. It must be done a long time after a meal. It's best to do it first thing in the morning on a totally empty stomach. Remember that when you're doing it, to have the chin going down into the notch in the chest, because when you're lifting a lot of blood up towards the head with your diaphragm, you're increasing intracranial pressures there by a lot. And to avoid any type of complication or anything like that, your necklock is Jalahandharapanda is very, very important. You need to do it either with somebody watching you, preferably a yoga instructor. The other thing about this exercise is that you can also correct yourself if you film it, or if you're doing it in front of. If you're doing it in front of a mirror, it's still very hard to do it because you're not looking in the right direction. You can't look at the mirror and see what you're doing without lifting your head. So it's better to have someone else filming you for that one. If you need a guide for any of this stuff, I'm here for you in remote training, remote coaching program, which we have on our website. And we train athletes in all aspects of preparing them for the summer, for winter training, and of course we also, for those who can't get to us during the summer, we train them in every aspect to meet their particular challenges. It means very good relationship between two people, because we have to know you very well. We have to know what your challenges are, what's stopping you now. Yeah, and together we construct a strategy to get beyond that. So we've talked a little about what you should be doing right at the beginning of the season in the pool, which is basically working about style. We've talked about flexibility. These are the rock basis of, before you even begin to take off on the winter training, these are the things that you have to consider. We talked about a very powerful breathhold exercise, the breathwalk, which is accessible to everybody. It has different forms, different levels, and different ways of doing it. And that is, of course, to make it specific for you, is again the work of working with a trainer. I think that we've pretty much run our course for tonight. Remind you, I'm Aaron Solomons. I can be found, I'm from Eilat. I'm from the Freedivers at freedivers.net. And we have a Facebook page as well. We have the remote coaching program. I will be talking to you next week. Please let me have any suggestions that you might have about things that you'd like to talk about. I'll try and talk about them in more detail. It's hard to cover an awful lot of subjects. Better to go into one subject and really cover it in detail, so that you're left having something that you can work with. At the moment, these are just ideas or general guidelines. We want to try and get more specific and try and get something working for you. So I need your questions for that one. So wishing you all a very good week. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, tell your friends. And do give me any suggestions of topics that you'd like talked about for next week. Just post it on the link. Do tell us if you have any criticisms of the thing. I'm very happy to hear those. By criticisms we learn. And the other thing, of course, this will be recorded. So if anybody couldn't make it and would have liked to have made it, they can catch the recording. So until next week, wishing you all a very good week and safe diving. Good night.